Now that we know how to construct our rectangles, we know how many we need, we know how wide to make them, we know how tall to make them, we're going to look at how we actually break these rectangles up into smaller segments and shade and let the overlapping shaded portions represent the product of these mixed numbers. So let's look at an example. Let's suppose we wanted to represent 2 1/3 times 1/2. As mentioned in part 1, if we look at this first fraction, the 2 1/3, we're going to need 3 times, and if we look at the 1/2, the next whole number that's larger than 1/2 is 1. Okay, and we got the 3 from the next whole number that's larger than 2 1/2. 2 1/3 is 3. So we're going to need 3 times 1, or 3 rectangles. And if we look at the denominator of this first fraction, that's a 3. So we know our rectangles need to be 3 units tall. And if we look at the denominator of the second fraction, our rectangle need to be 2 units wide. So let's look at this. We want 3 rectangles. We want them to be 3 units tall and 2 units wide. Here's another one. 3 units tall, 2 units wide, and we need one more. 3 units tall and 2 units wide. Now, let's talk about how we're going to split these rectangles up. Let me make these just a little bit darker. Now, let's look at the 2 1/3. I'm not concerned about the 1/2 right now. So we're only looking at the 2 1/3. The denominator on this fraction is a 3, and remember we said we wanted our rectangles to be 3 units tall. So what we're going to do is we're going to take each of those rectangles and we're going to split them up into 3 equal segments. All the way down. Now, let's talk about what the 2 1/3 means. Now notice we have one rectangle here. Here's another rectangle. So what we're going to do, we're going to shade each of these rectangles. We're going to shade this entire rectangle. We're going to shade this second rectangle completely. And we're going to shade 1/3 of this last rectangle. So let's look at this. So we're shading this first rectangle completely. We're going to shade the second rectangle completely. And we're going to shade 1/3 of our last rectangle. So for now, I'm finished with the 2 1/3. Now let's take a look at the 1/2. Remember, we separated our, we made our rectangles 2 units wide. So what I want to do is I'm going to split each of those rectangles up vertically. I'm going to split them up into 2 equal segments. Go all the way down. Now, the second fraction is 1/2. So what I want to do is all the way down, I'm going to shade 1/2 of all of my rectangles. All right, so we're going to keep going down. Now, I want you to notice something. If you see how these colors changed at the bottom, what actually happened is that those really dark blue segments were segments where our shaded portions overlapped each other. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We had 7 of those sections where the colors overlapped each other. But let's look at this. If we look at just one of our rectangles, one rectangle has 6 sections to it. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So what we're actually looking at is, and let me make that 6, which is the number of rectangles in one, I'm sorry, the number of sections in one rectangle. I'm going to make that the denominator of this fraction, because that represents the whole. I have one whole rectangle has 6 parts to it. Now, I have 7, remember, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 overlapping sections where one rectangle is broken up into 6 parts. So this fraction, 7 over 6, actually represents the product of 2 1/3 and 1/2. So our product, or our answer, is always represented by the number of rectangles, or the number of sections that overlap each other, divided by the number of sections that are present in one rectangle. So let's go through this mathematically and check to see if when we multiply 2 1/3 times 1/2, if we actually get 7 over 6. So 2 1/3, we rewrite that as an improper fraction. 2 1/3, 2 times 3 is 6, plus 1 is 7/3. And we multiply that by 1/2. Numerator times numerator, denominator times denominator, so that's equal to 7 over 6. So that verifies that. Now we can also rewrite this 7 over 6 as a mixed number. That's actually an improper fraction. So to rewrite 7 over 6 as a mixed number, it's going to be 1 1/6. Well, how can I show 1 1/6 with this model that I have over here? But what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to take some of these overlapping sections and rearrange them a little bit. So this is what I mean. Notice that I have two of these rectangles that, well, actually all of those rectangles, none of them are completely filled up. Notice I have a couple of them. Okay, this one has some empty spots over here, those light blue sections. The first one has 3 empty spots. The second one has 3 empty spots, 3 non-overlapping spots, and the last one has 5 sections that don't overlap each other. Suppose I wanted to try to fill as many of these rectangles up as possible with the number of overlapping sections that I have. So what I mean is, if I look at this second rectangle, let's take 3 of these overlapping sections and put them up here in the first rectangle to fill up those spots. When I do that, I'm going to have something that looks like this. So we're going to fill these up with the ones from the second rectangle. And now the ones in the second rectangle, I don't need those anymore because I used them in the first rectangle. So let me clear this out. So I've used those. All right. Now, let's look at what I have here. This second rectangle is empty. I don't even want to think about it anymore. But let's look at what I still have shaded. Notice I have this first block, this first rectangle is completely full. So that is one complete rectangle. One full rectangle. And if I look at this last rectangle, I only have one part that's still overlapping, one part that still has 2 colors in that particular section. I have 1 out of 6. So that's 1 and 1/6. So once you look at all of your overlapping sections, if you want to show the mixed number that represents those, all you have to do is go back and move some of your sections around, move some of your overlapping sections around to fill up as many of those sections as you can, and then whatever you have left, what you have that's shaded represents that mixed number. Let's look at another example. Let's see if we can represent 1 and 1/4 times 1 and 1/2. So let's see how many rectangles we need. 1 and 1/4, the next whole number that's larger than 1 and 1/4 is 2. And the next whole number that's larger than 1 and 1/2 is also 2. So I'm going to need 2 times 2. I'm going to need 4 rectangles. Now my first rectangle, what I'm going to have, well, each rectangle is actually going to have to be 4 units tall and 2 units wide. So let's look at our rectangles. We need 4 of them. Each one needs to be 4 units tall and 2 units wide. Four units tall, 2 units wide. But remember, I need 4 rectangles. So I want 2 of them going down this way, and then going across will be my other 2. All right, 4 units tall, 2 units wide. Now let's see how we're going to start separating these into smaller segments and shading. Let's only look at the 1 1/4 right now. That denominator is a 4, so that tells me I need to separate these into 4 equal pieces going down. And then after I separate all of these into 4 equal segments, I'm going to have to do some shading. My fraction is 1 1/4. So all the way down, I'm going to have to shade 1 complete row all the way down. And then my last row, I'm going to have to shade 1/4 of it. Alright, so this is what I'm going to do. All the way down, I'm going to shade this entire, all the way down, I'm going to shade this entire row. And then for these 2 rectangles on the bottom, I'm going to shade 1/4 of those rows. So it's going to look like this. So this is one complete row that's shaded all the way down. That's one complete row all the way across. And then here I'm going to shade 1/4 of those rows. All right, so that's my 1 and that's my 1/4. So for now, I'm done with the 1 1/4. Now let's take a look at the 1 1/2. So what I'm going to have to do going across is I'm going to have to shade 1 complete column, and I'm going to have to shade 1/2 of the other column. But let me separate it first, because this denominator is a 2, so that means each one of these rectangles needs to be split up into 2 equal pieces going down. Now I can shade, and I want to shade this entire column all the way down. So we can see we have some yellow and this other color. That overlap each other. Let me use a different color here. And choose a different color here. Let me fill that back in. It's my 1 1/4. Had to go back and fill that in. Now okay. There we go. So we're filling in this entire column all the way down. And then we're going to fill in 1/4 of the next column. I'm sorry, 1/2 of the next column. So we want 1 1/2. So now what we need to do, we need to go back and look at the number of sections where our colors overlapped each other. Alright, so for our sections where the colors overlapped, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. We have 15 overlapping sections, and if we look at one of the rectangles, one rectangle has 8 parts to it. So this model represents the product of 1 1/4 times 1 1/2. Let's see if we can verify that. 1 1/4 is the same as 5/4 times 1 1/2 is the same as 3/2, and 5/4 times 3/2 is 15/8. Now, if we rewrite 15/8 as a mixed number, 8 into 15 one time, and we have a remainder of 7. So I should be able to take these blocks and rearrange them to try to fill something up or fill as many empty spots as I can, and have something that represents 1 7/8. All right, so let's do this. Notice that we already have one rectangle that's completely full. So that one is completely full. But this second one has some empty spots in it. So let's take some of the blocks, some of these overlapping sections from the bottom down here, and let's move them up here into some of these spots. So we're going to take those three and we're going to move them up here to the top. And now I'm going to go back and erase the ones that I moved because I don't have them anymore. Let's look at what we have here. We have one rectangle that's completely full, and we have another rectangle that has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of its 8 parts full. So that's our 1 7/8. All right, let's look at one more example. Let's look at 2 1/3 times 3/4. How many rectangles do we need? The next whole number larger than 2 1/3 is 3. The next whole number larger than 3/4 is 1, and 3 times 1 is 3. So I need 3 rectangles, and each rectangle needs to be 3 units tall and 4 units wide. So here we go with our first rectangle. 3 units tall, 4 units wide. Here's another one, 3 units tall. Oops, I did that backwards. Let me back up 1 second. I want 3 units tall and 4 units wide. Three units tall, 4 units wide. 3 units tall, 4 units wide. Now, let's look at our 2 1/3. Since this denominator is a 3, we know we're separating each of these rectangles into 3 equal units all the way down. And now we need to shade. How much do we shade? We need to shade 2 1/3. We need to shade one complete rectangle, another complete rectangle, and we need to shade 1/3 of that last rectangle. And so that's one of our rectangles. That's two of them. And we need to shade 1/3 of the last one. Okay, so I'm finished with the 2 1/3 for now. Now if we look at the 3/4, that denominator is a 4. So I need to separate each of those rectangles going from left to right into 4 equal parts. Let's make my line a little bit darker. And then my last one. Now, my fraction is 3/4, so I need to shade 1, 2, 3 of those 4 columns from top to bottom. That's 1, 2, 3 of my 4 columns from top to bottom. Now let's go back and count the number of sections where the colors overlap each other. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. So we have a total of 21 overlapping sections where one rectangle has 12 parts. Now, this fraction can be reduced, but before we do that, let's just go ahead and multiply our 2 1/3 by our 3/4 to verify this, to see if this does give us 21/12. The 2 1/3, we can rewrite that as 7/3. 3 times 2 is 6 plus 1 is 7 times the 3/4. That's going to give us 21/12. So we know that's correct. But this fraction can actually be reduced. If we reduce this numerator and this denominator can both be divided by 3. So when we reduce this fraction, we get 7/4. Now, 7/4 as a mixed number is 1 3/4. So what I have in this model should be able, I should be able to represent 1 3/4. Now let's go back and see if we can fill up some of these blocks, some of these empty blocks like we did in the last few examples. Now notice here we have 3 empty blocks in this first rectangle. But if we look all the way down here at the bottom, this last rectangle has 3 overlapping blocks in them. So let's take these 3 from the bottom and let's move them up here and fill in these 3 in the first rectangle. So when I do that, fill that one up, and that one up. Now that I have used those 3 up here at the top, I don't need them anymore down here at the bottom. So I'm just going to erase them. Alright, so I don't need those anymore. Now let's look at what we have here. We have at the top, we have one rectangle that is completely full. We have one rectangle that is completely full. And if we look at this second rectangle, we have 1, 2, 3 of its 4 sections are full. 3/4. So there's our 1 3/4. So just remember, first of all, you need to know how many rectangles you're going to have. Then you need to know how wide and how tall to make them. Then you split them up into equal pieces and you shade based on the fraction that you're given. And once you shade, you look at the overlapping sections, or the sections where you have more than one color in one block. And the total number of overlapping sections that you have divided by the total number of units in one rectangle is what represents the product of your 2 fractions.